The darkness on these roads isn't just absence of light. It's a living thing, thick and hungry, swallowing the beams of my headlights before they can reach more than 15 feet ahead. Tonight, it feels particularly ravenous. I've been making these late-night deliveries for 8 months, and something about this shift feels different. Wrong. The radio static grows louder between stations as I drive deeper into the outskirts of the city, my phone's GPS struggling to maintain a signal. When the figure appears at the side of the road, I almost don't stop. Company policy prohibits picking up hitchhikers. But something about the silhouette, the way it stands perfectly still, not even a thumb extended, makes my foot ease onto the brake. I roll down my window just enough to hear him speak. Through the crack, cold air rushes in, carrying the scent of wet asphalt and something else, something metallic and organic that makes my nostrils flare. The man asks if I'm heading toward Oak Ridge. His voice is even, controlled, but his eyes dart past me to scan the empty road behind. I hesitate, my finger hovering over the window button. 3 deliveries remaining, all in that direction. Against my better judgment, I unlock the passenger door. He slides in with unsettling grace for someone who's been standing in the rain. His clothes are barely damp. As the dome light flicks off, I notice his face in the green glow of the dashboard. Angular, pale, with deep-set eyes that reflect no light. He thanks me softly, placing a small duffel bag at his feet. I've picked up strangers before on these lonely routes, but something about this one sends a ripple of unease down my spine. My throat tightens as I pull back onto the road. The first few miles pass in silence. I steal glances at him between checking my GPS. He sits perfectly still, staring straight ahead, hands resting on his knees with fingers splayed in an unnatural position. When I ask where exactly in Oak Ridge he's headed, he answers without turning, saying anywhere along the main strip would be fine. His accent is slight, but unplaceable, as if he's carefully neutralizing it. I try casual conversation, the weather, the lateness of the hour, but his responses are clipped, precise, ending each exchange before it can gain momentum. At my first delivery stop, a 24-hour diner at the edge of town, he remains in the car. I tell him I'll just be a minute, but he barely acknowledges me. As I walk away, the weight of his gaze presses between my shoulder blades. My hands tremble slightly as I hand the paper bag to the night cook. When I return, the passenger hasn't moved, but the vents have been adjusted, all now pointing directly at him. The air conditioning runs at maximum despite the cool night. Sweat beads along my hairline despite the chill. Back on the road, I notice him checking his watch repeatedly, an old-fashioned timepiece with a leather band that looks too tight on his wrist. The skin around it appears discolored, though in the dim light I can't be sure. When I mention the time, asking if he's running late, he flinches. It's subtle but unmistakable. His response comes after a beat too long. He's not concerned with time, he says, just a habit, but his fingers drum against his thigh in perfect half-second intervals, like a countdown. The roads grow narrower as we approach my second stop, a residential address in a neighborhood where the streetlights are spaced too far apart. The passenger grows increasingly agitated, shifting in his seat, continuously checking the side mirror. When I ask if everything's okay, he assures me he's fine, just eager to reach his destination. His smile doesn't reach his eyes. It sits wrong on his face, like an ill-fitting mask. During my second delivery, I take longer than necessary, pretending to confirm the address while actually sending my location to my supervisor. Not an emergency, I text. Just a precaution, As I walk back to the car, I notice a strange blue light briefly illuminating the interior before going dark. When I open the driver's door, the passenger quickly pockets something. The car smells different, like ozone after a lightning strike. He asks how many more stops I have. When I tell him just one more before we reach the main street in Oak Ridge, he nods too enthusiastically. Relief and anticipation flash across his features. I notice now that his breathing has a rhythm that doesn't seem quite human, too measured, with pauses that stretch uncomfortably long. My own breathing grows shallow in response, my chest tightening with each mile. The final delivery takes me down a long private drive to an isolated house. The passenger's reaction is immediate and disturbing. His entire body tenses, and for a moment, I swear his eyes reflect the dashboard lights, like an animal's. He asks with forced casualness if this is a common delivery location. I explain that it's a regular customer, an elderly insomniac who often orders late-night meals. The passenger seems to relax marginally, but his knuckles remain white where he grips his knees. I realize I've never seen him blink. While delivering the final order, I linger on the customer's porch, suddenly reluctant to return to my vehicle. The old man who answers senses my discomfort and asks if I'm all right. I consider confiding in him, but what would I say? That I'm unsettled by a quiet hitchhiker, that something about him seems wrong in ways I can't articulate. I assure the customer I'm fine, just tired from the long shift. Walking back to the car, I notice the passenger has changed positions. He's now directly behind the driver's seat, his bag open on his lap. My steps falter. Through the windshield, our eyes meet, and something primitive in my brain screams danger. But he smoothly slides back to the passenger seat, zipping the bag closed in one fluid motion. As I settle into the driver's seat, my hand instinctively checks my pocket for my keys, though the engine is still running. Now heading for Oak Ridge proper, the narrow 2-lane road winds through dense woods. The passenger stares intently into the darkness between the trees. Twice I catch him mouthing words to himself, his lips forming shapes that don't seem to match any language I know. My radio, which has been playing low-volume late-night talk shows, suddenly emits a burst of static so loud I flinch. Through the white noise, I swear I hear voices speaking in rapid, urgent tones. The passenger reaches over and shuts it off, apologizing, claiming some electronic devices react strangely around him. A nervous condition, he explains, something about his electromagnetic field. The hairs on my arms stand up, not from fear, though that's certainly present, but from actual static electricity that seems to emanate from his side of the car. My dashboard lights flicker, and for a brief moment, the headlights dim. The passenger notices my white-knuckled grip on the steering wheel and suggests I pull over if I'm feeling unwell. His concern sounds hollow, rehearsed. I ignore the suggestion and press on, now desperate to reach Oak Ridge and be rid of him. 5 miles from town, he asks me to stop. We're nowhere, just dense forest on both sides and empty roads stretching ahead and behind. I tell him we're almost to Oak Ridge, but he insists, saying this location is perfect. Perfect for what? I wonder, my mouth going desert dry. When I hesitate, he reaches into his bag. My entire body goes rigid, anticipating violence, but he withdraws only a handful of crumpled bills. He offers twice what the ride would be worth, his expression unreadable in the darkness. I pull onto the shoulder, gravel crunching under my tires. Before I can fully stop, he's opening his door. Cool air rushes in, carrying that same metallic scent from earlier, stronger now. As he exits, he leans back in and fixes me with those lightless eyes. He tells me to drive away immediately and not to stop for anyone else tonight, no matter what I might see or hear. The warning sounds both genuine and threatening. As he withdraws his duffel bag, something falls from it, a small device with blinking lights that rolls under my seat. He doesn't seem to notice. Before I can mention it, he's walking into the woods, quickly swallowed by darkness. I sit frozen, engine idling, staring at the spot where he vanished. Every instinct tells me to drive away immediately, but curiosity, that fatal human flaw, makes me reach under the seat. The device fits in my palm, a smooth metallic cylinder with a digital display counting down from 60 how. Not a bomb. It's too small, too simple, but its purpose feels no less ominous. As I watch, the counter jumps erratically, numbers flickering between sequences that make no mathematical sense. 59, 47, 53, 12, 47, 36. Static electricity makes my skin prickle again, more intensely now. I drop the device into my cup holder and put the car in drive, desperate to put distance between myself and whatever just transpired. As I accelerate, my rearview mirror catches a brief flash of blue light from deep within the forest. The same color as the light I'd glimpsed in the car earlier. The same instant, my radio turns itself on, scanning rapidly through frequencies before stopping on dead air. Through the static, a voice that might be his, but somehow older, hollower, speaks 3 words. He's found me. The countdown on the device jumps to 010, and every electronic system in my car dies simultaneously. I coast to a stop in perfect darkness. In the sudden silence, I hear something moving through the underbrush parallel to the road, something large that doesn't disturb the branches it passes through. My breath fogs the window as I strain to see into the impenetrable black. The thing in the woods stops moving. I sense rather than see its attention fix on my vehicle. The air temperature plummets so rapidly that frost crystals form on my windshield. As I fumble for my phone, also dead, the device in my cup holder emits a soft blue glow. The display now shows coordinates and a single word: run. My car's electrical system surges back to life with a sound like a gasp. The headlights illuminate a figure standing in the road ahead, but it isn't the passenger. This thing merely wears the suggestion of a human shape, like a hastily constructed approximation. Where its face should be, swirling darkness shifts and reforms continuously. I slam the accelerator and swerve around the figure, refusing to look as I pass it. In my peripheral vision, it doesn't turn to watch me go. Instead, it faces the woods where my passenger disappeared, its not quite body elongating impossibly as it moves toward the trees. I don't stop driving until I reach the highway, the small device now silent and dark in my cup holder. I've delivered to every corner of this county for months, but I don't recognize a single landmark along the way. The roads seem to shift, distances contracting and expanding illogically. When I finally see the green highway sign, I nearly sob with relief. That was 3 weeks ago. I quit my delivery job the next day. The device never reactivated, eventually disappearing from my apartment despite being locked in a drawer. Sometimes my phone displays text messages that vanish when I try to read them. My television occasionally shows me footage of forests at night, regardless of the channel. Yesterday, I received a package with no return address. Inside was a wristwatch with a too tight leather band and a note. He's still looking, but now he's seen you too. I buried the watch in the woods behind my apartment complex. This morning, it was on my nightstand, the second hand moving in half-second intervals. Perfect timing, like a countdown. The thin line of reception bars on my phone disappeared exactly 47 minutes after Mark and I crossed the county line. I remember checking the time, 2:17 p.m., because something about losing that connection to the outside world sent an involuntary shiver down my spine, despite the summer heat baking the car's interior. The radio had been cutting in and out for the last 20 miles, leaving us with nothing but static and occasional fragments of forgotten country songs. It shouldn't have bothered me. This was supposed to be the point. Disconnecting, celebrating the end of our final semester, hitting the open road with nothing but our thoughts and 600 miles of asphalt ahead of us. Finally, Mark said, tossing his own dead phone onto the dashboard. No more emails, no more notifications, no more Professor Kendrick asking for revisions. I forced a smile, keeping my eyes fixed on the endless ribbon of highway stretching before us. The landscape had been gradually shifting for hours. First suburbs, then farmland, and now this strange no-man's land of scrubby trees and rocky outcroppings that seemed to swallow sound itself. Even the air felt different here, heavier somehow, as if the oxygen content had subtly decreased. That's when my phone vibrated in the cup holder. My first thought was that I'd imagined it. No service meant no messages. But then it vibrated again, insistent, demanding attention. I glanced down at the screen, the blue light illuminating the car's interior. Enjoying the drive, Alex? That sunset over Caldwell Ridge was something else, wasn't it? My mouth went dry. We had indeed stopped at Caldwell Ridge's scenic overlook about an hour ago, watching the sun bleed crimson across the horizon. My heart rate kicked up a notch. "Mark," I said, my voice sounding foreign to my own ears. "Take a look at this." He leaned over, squinting at the message. Asked who it was from. I showed him that there was no number, no contact information, just the words floating on my screen, taunting me. Mark shrugged it off as some delayed message that had just now found enough signal to come through. A reasonable explanation that I desperately wanted to believe. But we both knew we hadn't told anyone about our impromptu stop at the ridge. I placed my phone back in the cup holder, wiping my suddenly sweaty palms against my jeans. The rational part of my brain scrambled for explanations, coincidence, delayed messaging, some app tracking our location in the background. But another part, a more primitive part, whispered that something was wrong. 30 miles later, as shadows lengthened across the landscape, transforming familiar shapes into crouching beasts, my phone vibrated again. That conversation about Jennifer was pretty harsh, Alex. Do you really think Mark doesn't know you're still in love with her? My blood turned to ice water in my veins. 2 hours ago, while Mark was filling the gas tank, I'd called Jennifer and left a rambling voicemail about missing her, about regretting our breakup, things I hadn't told Mark, things I couldn't tell him because Jennifer was his cousin and that line wasn't supposed to be crossed. "Another message?" Mark asked, noticing my rigid posture. I locked the screen before he could see it, mumbling something about spam. My heartbeat drummed against my ribs with such force I was certain Mark could hear it. Whoever, whatever, was sending these messages knew things they couldn't possibly know. Had someone planted a microphone in the car? Were we being followed? I twisted in my seat, scanning the highway behind us. A few scattered cars, none particularly close, none that had been with us for long. The setting sun cast long shadows across the asphalt, turning the world into a place of concealment and sharp contrast. "You okay?" Mark asked, concern edging his voice. "You seem tense." I wasn't okay. My skin had begun to crawl with the distinct sensation of being watched. Every pore on my body felt exposed, examined, catalogued by unseen eyes. I told Mark I was fine, just tired from the drive. He suggested we stop at the next gas station, still about 40 miles ahead according to the last road sign. 40 miles of empty highway, of vulnerability. The messages continued. Every 15 minutes, like clockwork. Your heart rate is elevated, Alex. Are you afraid? Mark's starting to notice something's wrong. What will you tell him when he asks? That truck that passed you 5 minutes ago. Did you notice it had no driver? Each one sent fresh waves of panic coursing through my system. My hands trembled on the steering wheel, my vision tunneling until the highway ahead seemed to stretch into infinity. I began checking the rearview mirror compulsively, certain that at any moment I would glimpse our stalker. By the time we pulled into the decrepit gas station, a lonely outpost of civilization with flickering fluorescence that attracted swarms of moths, I was drenched in cold sweat. The sun had fully descended, leaving us in a darkness so complete it seemed to have substance. The mountains loomed around us, their silhouettes cutting jagged lines against the star-studded sky. "I'll fill up," Mark said, seemingly oblivious to my deteriorating mental state. "Want to grab some snacks?" I nodded mechanically, desperate for a moment alone to collect myself. The gas station convenience store was a time capsule from the 1980s. Faded linoleum, buzzing refrigerator cases, and a lone attendant whose ancient face was illuminated by the glow of a small television. The bell above the door jingled as I entered, causing the attendant to look up briefly before returning his attention to the static-filled broadcast. My phone vibrated in my pocket, behind the beef jerky display. "I left something for you." A violent tremor passed through my body. I wanted to ignore it, to flee back to the car and demand that Mark drive us to the nearest police station. Instead, I found myself moving woodenly toward the beef jerky display, some morbid curiosity overriding my fear. There, tucked behind the packages, was a folded piece of paper. With shaking fingers, I unfolded it. It was a photograph of Mark and me, taken from inside our car, from the back seat. In the photo, we were both looking ahead at the road, unaware. It was time-stamped from earlier that day. The store tilted around me. Dark spots bloomed in my vision as hyperventilation set in. I stumbled backward, colliding with a rack of chips that clattered to the floor. The attendant didn't even look up. I fled the store, the photograph clutched in my hand. Mark was just replacing the gas nozzle, his expression changing from casual to concerned as he took in my wild-eyed appearance. "Jesus, what happened? You look like you've seen a ghost." Words failed me. Instead, I thrust the photograph at him, watching as confusion gave way to comprehension and finally to fear. "What the hell is this?" he whispered, turning the photo over as if expecting to find an explanation on the back. "Who? We need to go," I interrupted, already moving toward the passenger side. "You drive. Now." Mark didn't argue. Within seconds, we were back on the highway, the gas station receding into the darkness behind us. I explained everything, the messages, the impossible knowledge they contained, the feeling of being watched. "This is insane," Mark said, knuckles white on the steering wheel. "Completely insane. There has to be an explanation, some kind of prank or..." My phone vibrated. "You shouldn't have found that photo, Alex. Now the game has to change." I read it aloud, my voice cracking. Mark accelerated, pushing the car well beyond the speed limit. The headlights carved a tunnel through the darkness, but beyond their reach was nothing but impenetrable black. "Try calling 911, Mark suggested. desperation evident in his voice. I tried. No service. I tried again. Nothing. The messages continued, growing increasingly disturbing. Do you think you can outrun me when I'm already with you? Mark's thinking about pulling over and checking the car for tracking devices. Tell him that won't help. Look in the rearview mirror, Alex. What do you see in the back seat? That last one nearly caused Mark to drive off the road when I read it to him. We both turned, expecting to find someone, something, crouched in the shadows behind us. There was nothing visible, but that didn't stop the cold dread from pooling in my stomach. What happened next defies rational explanation. The car's electronic systems began to malfunction, headlights flickering, radio turning on by itself, blasting static at deafening volumes. The temperature dropped so rapidly that our breath fogged in the air. And then, impossibly, my phone began to ring. Unknown number. Mark screamed at me not to answer it, but by then I was beyond rational thought. I accepted the call, putting it on speaker. Static, just static. Until, Alex, my name, whispered in my own voice, distorted and wrong. Do you understand yet? Who is this? I demanded, my voice breaking. What do you want? Look at Mark, Alex. Really look at him. The call ended. I turned to Mark, whose face was illuminated in the eerie glow of the dashboard lights. For a moment, just a flicker of an instant, his features seemed to shift, to become something else. Something with too many angles. Something that didn't fit properly within the confines of human anatomy. A hallucination. It had to be. Stress and fear playing tricks on my mind. Pull over, I said suddenly. I need to check something. Mark pulled onto the shoulder, the car's tires crunching on gravel. We sat in silence for a long moment, the only sound our ragged breathing. I began carefully. There's something in the car with us, has been the whole time. Mark didn't respond. His face was in shadow now, unreadable. Mark? Slowly he turned to me. In the dim light, his expression seemed wrong somehow, like a mask that didn't quite fit. There's nothing in the car, Alex, he said, his voice flat, emotionless. Just us. It's always been just us. My phone vibrated one final time. He's not Mark. Hasn't been since Caldwell Ridge. I'm trapped in here with you. In the phone. In the car's systems. In your head. The real Mark is gone, Alex. And you'll never find your way back to the highway we turned off. 3 hours ago. I looked up from the message to find Mark staring at me. A smile spreading across his face that was too wide, too knowing. Outside the car windows, I realized with dawning horror that we were no longer on the highway. Just an unmarked dirt road surrounded by dense forest that I didn't recognize, had no memory of turning onto. Ready to continue our trip, Alex? Not Mark asked, his voice now containing subtle harmonics that no human vocal cords could produce. We still have a long way to go. The highway had disappeared. My friend had disappeared. And as the thing wearing Mark's face put the car in drive, I realized with absolute certainty that whatever road we were now traveling, it wasn't leading anywhere I wanted to go. But I was already along for the ride. The darkness has eyes here. I know this now. Not metaphorically, literally. Something watches from between the trees, studies me through my windows, and waits. I came to this remote cabin seeking silence, but silence, I've discovered, is merely a canvas for subtler sounds. The scratching behind walls, the soft pressure of footsteps on pine needles, the quiet displacement of my possessions when I'm not looking. My doctor called it paranoia, a side effect of chronic insomnia. But doctors don't live in forests. Doctors don't wake to find mud tracked across their porch that doesn't match their boot treads. I haven't slept in 3 days, and the longer I stay awake, the more convinced I become. I am not alone here. The rental listing called it a writer's retreat. Quaint cabin, fully modernized, perfect solitude for the creative mind. After 8 months of pharmaceutical failures and sleep specialists shaking their heads, I was desperate enough to believe that geography could cure me. The city had become an acoustic torture chamber. Traffic, neighbors, sirens, all conspiring against my rest. My editor had extended my deadline twice already. The novel remained half-finished, my mind too fragmented to weave coherent narratives. When I first turned onto the unmarked dirt road, something in my chest loosened. Pine trees stood sentinel on both sides, their shadows making dappled patterns across my windshield. The forest breathed around me, alive but peaceful. The cabin itself was exactly as advertised. Rough-hewn logs, stained dark with age, a sturdy porch with a swing, windows that gleamed in the afternoon light. Inside, the previous occupant had left it immaculate. Kitchen counters bare, except for a coffee maker. Bedroom dominated by a king-sized bed with crisp white sheets. Living room with a stone fireplace and bookshelves stocked with classics. The real estate agent, a woman with a smile too wide for her face, had emphasized the privacy. "Nearest neighbor is 4 miles that away," she'd said, waving vaguely eastward. "Cell reception is spotty, but the satellite internet is reliable. Perfect for when you need to disconnect, but still submit those chapters, right?" She'd laughed, and I'd nodded, already imagining nights of deep, uninterrupted sleep. The first night exceeded my expectations. I unpacked, arranged my workspace, laptop facing the largest window with its view of endless trees, and prepared a simple dinner. The silence was so complete, it seemed to have texture. I could hear my own heartbeat as I slid between the sheets. For the first time in months, sleep claimed me almost immediately. I awoke refreshed, the sun already high. Nearly 10 hours of sleep. A miracle. I moved through the day with an unfamiliar clarity, writing flowing with an ease I'd forgotten was possible. This, I thought, was healing. The second night, I noticed the first anomaly. A sound like something being dragged across the porch. Subtle, but in such perfect silence, it might as well have been a gunshot. I froze at my desk, fingers hovering over keys. Probably wildlife, I reasoned. The agent had mentioned deer, raccoons, the occasional black bear. Nothing to worry about. But in the morning, my coffee mug wasn't where I'd left it. I distinctly remembered placing it by the sink after my final cup, but now it sat on the counter near the refrigerator. A trivial thing. Maybe I'd moved it absent-mindedly, yet it gnawed at me. By the 4th day, the incidents had multiplied. My boots, which I always left by the door, had been moved slightly, angled differently. A book I'd been reading was open to a different page than where I'd left my bookmark. Small stones from the path outside appeared on my welcome mat, arranged in what almost resembled a pattern. I tried calling the real estate agent. The connection crackled, her voice breaking up as she assured me that no one else had access to the property, that I was perfectly safe. Wildlife, she suggested again, or the isolation playing tricks on my mind. Wasn't I there to write a novel, after all? Perhaps my creative imagination was overactive. That night, I checked all windows and doors twice before going to bed. Sleep came reluctantly, a skittish animal that darted away at the slightest provocation. I dreamed of eyes watching from the tree line, of fingers testing my locks while I slept. When morning came, I found muddy footprints on the porch. Not animal tracks, human, smaller than my size 11 boots, with a distinctive wear pattern on the heel. They approached the door, lingered, then circled to peer through the living room window. My heart pounded as I followed them. They disappeared at the edge of the forest, as if whoever had made them had simply melted into the trees. I stood there, morning mist curling around my ankles, straining to see deeper into the green shadows. I spent the day distracted, checking and rechecking the locks, peering out windows at random intervals. My writing session was a loss. Every creak of the cabin's wooden frame sent a jolt through my system. My mind raced through possibilities. A curious local, a transient using the cabin when it was unoccupied, another renter who hadn't been informed someone new had taken the property. That night, I set traps. Nothing lethal. I wasn't that far gone yet. String across doorways at ankle height, piles of dry leaves that would crunch underfoot, a perimeter of flour dusted across thresholds that would show footprints. I didn't sleep. Instead, I sat in the darkened living room with my laptop open but powered off, using its black screen as a mirror to watch the windows behind me. Around 3 a.m., the scratching started. Not outside, but inside the walls. A persistent, irregular rhythm, like fingernails seeking entrance. My skin prickled, sweat beading despite the cool night air. I told myself it was mice, or insects, or the house settling. The scratching moved, traveling from one wall to another, always just out of sight, always when I turned my head to locate it. It continued until dawn painted the horizon in watercolor grays and pinks. None of my traps had been triggered. The flower remained undisturbed, but when I checked my laptop, which I was certain I'd closed before my vigil, I found it open, the screen displaying a blank document with a single line of text: "You need to sleep." My fingers trembled as I slammed the laptop shut. I was losing my mind. Had to be. I'd typed it myself in some fugue state, some microsleep my exhausted brain had slipped into without my awareness. My insomnia was causing hallucinations, paranoia. This was textbook sleep deprivation. I called my doctor back in the city. Through the static, his voice sounded concerned as I described my symptoms. He suggested I come back. That isolation might be exacerbating my condition. I agreed to drive back the next morning. That afternoon, while packing, I found something under my bed. A small, intricately carved wooden figure, humanoid but proportioned wrongly, with elongated limbs and a featureless oval for a face. It hadn't been there when I arrived. I'd checked every corner of the cabin that first day. A cold weight settled in my stomach. I wrapped the figure in a t-shirt and buried it at the bottom of my suitcase. Whatever game someone was playing, I wanted no part of it. The scratching began earlier that night, barely after sunset. No longer confined to the walls, it circled the cabin's exterior, tracing the perimeter with methodical patience. I huddled in bed, fully dressed, car keys clutched in my fist. Just a few more hours until dawn, I told myself. Then I'd leave. The power went out at midnight. One moment the bedside lamp cast its reassuring glow. The next, impenetrable darkness swallowed everything. My phone showed no service. The backup generator, which the agent had proudly demonstrated, failed to kick in. In the new darkness, I heard footsteps on the porch. Unhurried, deliberate. They paused at the door, and the handle turned, slowly. Testing. The lock held. The footsteps circled to each window in turn, lingering, as if their owner was pressing their face to the glass, trying to locate me in the blackness. My mouth dried to paper. My heart hammered so violently I feared it might be audible outside my body. I slid from the bed to the floor, crawling toward the bathroom, the only room without an exterior window. The footsteps completed their circuit and returned to the door. A soft tapping began. 3 knocks. Pause. 3 knocks. Like a childhood code, asking permission to enter. I reached the bathroom, closed and locked the door. Pressed myself against the far wall, as if I could somehow melt through it if I pushed hard enough. The tapping at the cabin door stopped. Then, impossibly, it resumed. At the bathroom door. 3 gentle knocks. Pause. 3 more. Who's there? My voice emerged as a croak, barely audible. Silence answered, then scratching directly at eye level on the door. Not random now, but deliberate. I realized with mounting horror that whatever was on the other side was carving something into the wood. Minutes stretched like hours. The scratching continued, relentless. When it finally stopped, I heard retreating footsteps, not toward the cabin's exit, but deeper into the house, into my bedroom. Drawers opening and closing, the rustle of papers. I remained frozen, lungs burning from holding my breath, until the first gray light of dawn seeped under the bathroom door. No sounds had come from the cabin for at least an hour. Gathering my courage, I eased the door open. No one waited outside. The cabin was empty, everything in its place, except for my manuscript pages, which had been carefully arranged across the floor in a perfect spiral. At the center lay another wooden figure, identical to the first, but slightly larger. On the bathroom door, scratched deep into the wood, was a crude drawing of a sleeping face. Beneath it, words, "I only want to help you rest." I didn't bother packing. I grabbed my car keys, phone, and wallet and ran for the door. Outside, the forest was waking, birds calling, mist burning off under strengthening sunlight. Everything looked innocent, benign, until I saw my car, all 4 tires slashed, deflated against the dirt driveway. The hood stood open, vital components clearly missing. 4 miles to the nearest neighbor, the agent had said. 4 miles of forest trail. I could make it by midday if I started now. I was halfway down the driveway when I saw it, a figure standing motionless among the trees. Too distant to make out details, but unmistakably watching. Not approaching, not retreating, just observing. I should have run the other way, any other direction in the forest. But exhaustion had worn my judgment to a nub. I found myself walking toward the figure instead, drawn by some irrational certainty that confronting my watcher would end this nightmare. As I drew closer, the figure remained still. A man, I could tell now. Average height, dressed in dark clothes that helped him blend with the shadows between trees. His face came into focus gradually, ordinary, unremarkable except for his eyes. They held neither malice nor warmth, just an intense, clinical interest. "Why are you doing this?" I asked, when I was close enough to speak without shouting. He tilted his head slightly, studying me as one might study an insect under glass. "You haven't slept," he stated, not a question. "Because of you," I hissed, breaking into my cabin, moving my things, leaving those figures. A frown creased his forehead. "I haven't entered your cabin. That would be intrusive." The absurdity of his statement might have made me laugh if terror hadn't dried up all humor. "What do you call watching me? Writing messages on my computer? Slashing my tires?" Confusion flickered across his features. "I observe only, from a distance. It's my job." "Your job? What are you talking about?" He reached slowly into his pocket and withdrew something that glinted in the dappled light. A badge, professional, official looking. "Sleep study," he said simply. "Long-term observation of insomniacs in isolated environments. You signed the consent forms, page 17, paragraph 4. Memory stirred. The mountain of paperwork from the sleep clinic months ago, which I'd signed without reading fully. The real estate agent's too wide smile. Perfect for when you need to disconnect but still submit those chapters, right? That doesn't explain the figures, the scratching in the walls, the message on my door. He shook his head slowly. Not our protocols. We observe only. Document sleep patterns, environmental factors. He studied my face with increasing concern. How long since you've truly slept? I tried to calculate, but the days had blurred. 4, maybe 5 days. He nodded, as if confirming a theory. Sleep deprivation. Hallucinations begin typically after 72 hours. Paranoia. Time distortion. He gestured toward the cabin. There is no one else, just you and your mind turning against itself. I wanted to argue, to point out the physical evidence, the footprints, the figures, the carved message. But doubt had wedged itself into my certainty. What if he was right? What if isolation and insomnia had fractured my perception so completely that I couldn't distinguish reality from delusion? He seemed to read my thoughts. Return to the cabin. I'll call the research team. We'll terminate the study, get you proper help. I glanced back toward the cabin. It looked innocent in the morning light. Just wood and glass. No malevolence. The scratching, I insisted weakly, in the walls. Chipmunks, he said simply. They nest in the eaves this time of year. Exhaustion crashed over me suddenly, a physical weight. The adrenaline that had kept me moving ebbed, leaving my limbs leaden. I swayed on my feet. He didn't move to steady me, maintaining his distance. Go back. Rest. Help is coming. I found myself nodding, turning back toward the cabin as if pulled by an invisible thread. Each step felt heavier than the last. Behind me, I heard him speaking quietly into what must have been a radio or phone, though his words were indistinct. The cabin door stood open as I approached, though I was certain I'd left in too much haste to open it. Inside, everything was as I'd left it. Manuscript pages spiraled across the floor, wooden figure at the center. Except now, I noticed details I'd missed in my panic. The pages weren't arranged in a spiral, but had been scattered by the draft from the open windows. The wooden figure wasn't newly carved, but weathered with age, likely an artifact left by previous occupants that had fallen from a shelf. In the bathroom, I examined the door. The scratched face and message were there, but the lines were shallower than I'd perceived, the handwriting identical to my own scrawl when I'm taking notes half asleep. I stumbled to the bed, no longer fighting the exhaustion. As consciousness began to slip away, I heard footsteps on the porch. The sleep researcher, I assumed, coming to check on me. 3 knocks at the door. Pause. 3 more knocks. Then scratching. Not at the door this time, but at the window beside my bed. My eyes were too heavy to open, my body too leaden to move. As I finally surrendered to sleep, a whisper reached me, so close it might have been inside my own head. Rest now. I'll watch over you. In the distance, through the fog of approaching unconsciousness, I thought I heard the researcher's voice, speaking urgently into his radio, subject exhibiting severe paranoid delusions, requesting immediate extraction. I no longer know which is real, the watcher in the woods with his clinical concern, or the presence that scratches at my walls and moves through my home while I sleep. Perhaps both, perhaps neither. All I know with certainty is this. In the silence of night, in this forest where no one can hear, something is always watching, and it wants me to sleep. The shadows in my apartment no longer behave as they should. They stretch too far, linger too long, and sometimes, when I'm not looking directly at them, they seem to move against the light. It began 3 weeks ago, when Mark and I found that damned board in the attic of his rented Victorian. I still hear the sound it made when we pulled it from beneath the floorboards. Not the expected creak of old wood, but something closer to a sigh, as if the thing had been holding its breath for decades. I wasn't supposed to be in Mark's attic that afternoon. I was supposed to be helping him move furniture into the living room, but the house had drawn me upstairs with its peculiar gravity. The third floor had that distinct smell of abandoned spaces, dust, old paper, and something else I couldn't quite place, like metal left too long in the rain. Mark followed me up reluctantly, mentioning that the landlord had warned him to leave the attic alone, something about structural concerns. In retrospect, I wonder if the warning had been about something else entirely. The floorboard hadn't been properly nailed down. My foot caught its edge, and the wood lifted easily, revealing a hollow space beneath. That's where we found it, a board about 2 feet square, made of dark, polished wood that seemed to absorb rather than reflect the thin beams of light filtering through the dust-covered window. The surface featured intricate carvings, concentric circles interwoven with symbols I didn't recognize, and at its center, a pattern that looked vaguely like a compass rose, but with 7 points instead of 4. Mark suggested we take it downstairs where the light was better. I remember how unnaturally cold it felt against my palms as I lifted it, like touching marble that had been left outside during winter. We examined it in Mark's kitchen under the glare of fluorescent lights that somehow failed to fully illuminate the board's surface. The symbols seemed to shift slightly when viewed from different angles, an optical illusion that made my eyes strain uncomfortably. It's some kind of game, Mark concluded, running his fingers along the edge where small, shallow indentations were spaced at regular intervals. We searched the attic again, but found no playing pieces, no instructions. Mark theorized that we could use coins or buttons as markers. I should have left then. I felt an instinctive aversion to the board that I dismissed as irrational. Instead, I helped Mark set it up on his coffee table. We used quarters for markers and made up rules as we went along, moving our coins from one carved circle to the next, laughing at our improvised competition. At some point, Mark's quarter landed on the central 7-pointed star, and I swear I felt the air pressure in the room change, like the sudden drop before a thunderstorm. We joked about summoning demons or opening portals to other dimensions. Mark mockingly intoned made-up incantations in a theatrical voice. I remember checking my watch. It was just past 7 p.m. When I looked up again, the shadows in the corners of the room seemed deeper than they had been moments before. The first incident occurred that night, after I'd returned to my apartment. I was washing dishes when I heard what sounded like footsteps in my living room, a distinctive shuffling drag, as if someone were pulling an injured leg across the hardwood floor. My apartment is small, just a bedroom, bathroom, kitchenette, and living area. There's nowhere for anyone to hide. I checked every corner, looked under the bed, inside the closet, behind the shower curtain. Nothing. I convinced myself it was just the upstairs neighbor. Old buildings have their noises. Pipes expand and contract. Wood settles. But at 3 a.m, I woke to a rhythmic tapping on my bedroom wall. 3 quick raps, followed by 2 slow ones. Then silence. Then the same pattern again. I switched on my lamp, and the tapping stopped immediately. When I turned off the light, it began again, this time from a different wall. The next day, I called Mark to ask if he'd experienced anything strange. The static on the line was unusual, crackling and popping like a bad connection, though my cell service is normally excellent in my apartment. Mark's voice seemed distant, slightly distorted, as he admitted that yes, he'd noticed a few oddities. Lights flickering, cold spots in rooms, the sensation of being watched. But he dismissed these occurrences with nervous laughter. We agreed to meet at his place that evening to investigate the board further. I arrived at dusk, that treacherous time when the human eye is least reliable, when peripheral vision plays tricks and shadows gain substance. Mark's house looked different somehow. The angles of the roof too sharp, the windows too dark, as if they were openings into a space much deeper than the rooms behind them. Mark himself appeared haggard, his eyes underlined by purple smudges that spoke of sleepless nights. He showed me what he'd discovered, an old book in the local library that contained references to communing boards used in the late 1800s by certain occult societies. These boards supposedly served as conduits, channels through which entities from the spaces between could make contact with our world. According to the text, these entities were neither demons nor ghosts, but something older and less definable, consciousness without form, hunger without body. We should have stopped there. We should have returned the board to its hiding place, sealed it back under the floorboards, and walked away. Instead, driven by that uniquely human mixture of curiosity and arrogance, we decided to use the board properly this time. Mark had deciphered some of the symbols, figuring out what might constitute a legitimate way to use the thing. As the sun set completely, we placed the board on the floor and sat on opposite sides. Following Mark's interpretation, we each placed a drop of our blood, just a pinprick to the finger, onto the central star. We positioned our coins on the outermost circle and began moving them inward, one circle at a time, taking turns without speaking. The change in the room was gradual but unmistakable. The air grew heavy, difficult to breathe, as if the oxygen were being slowly replaced by something thicker. The temperature dropped until I could see my breath clouding before my face. Most disturbing of all was the silence. Not just quiet, but an absolute absence of sound that felt like pressure against my eardrums. When Mark's coin reached the central star, the lights went out, not with a flicker or a pop, but with a slow, deliberate dimming, as if the electricity were being drained rather than interrupted. In the darkness, I felt something brush against my shoulder, a touch so light it might have been a draft, except there was no movement of air in that stagnant room. Mark's voice came from across the board, tense and higher pitched than normal. He asked if I had touched him. I hadn't moved. As my eyes adjusted to the darkness, I could make out his silhouette, rigid with fear. Between us, on the board, our coins were glowing faintly with a bluish phosphorescence that illuminated nothing beyond the wooden surface. Then came the sound, a low, wet rasping, like congested breathing, that seemed to emanate from everywhere and nowhere at once. I fumbled for my phone to use as a flashlight, but it was dead, the screen remaining black despite my frantic pressing of buttons. Mark managed to light a candle he had on his mantelpiece. In the wavering orange glow, I saw that our coins had moved. Both now rested on the central star. Though neither of us had touched them, more disturbing still was what I glimpsed in the mirror hanging on the far wall. A figure standing behind me, tall and impossibly thin, its proportions all wrong, its face a blur of features that refused to resolve into anything recognizable. When I whirled around, there was nothing there, but the sensation of being observed persisted, a prickling awareness that crawled across my skin like static electricity. We ended our game abruptly, both of us too unnerved to continue. I insisted on taking the board home with me, though I can't fully explain why. Perhaps I thought I could better control whatever we'd unleashed if I kept the board close. Or perhaps the board itself influenced my decision, creating in me a compulsion to possess it. The following days brought an escalation of phenomena. I would wake to find all the faucets running in my bathroom, the water ice cold despite being turned to the hot setting. Electronic devices malfunctioned around me, computers crashing, phones dropping calls, watches stopping. At the office, colleagues commented on my distracted demeanor, asking if I was ill. I caught my reflection in windows and computer screens, always with the unsettling impression that my movements were slightly out of sync, as if my reflection were operating on a delay of milliseconds. Most disturbing were the dreams, vivid, exhausting nightmares in which I wandered endless corridors, pursued by something I could hear but never see. In these dreams, walls breathed and floors undulated beneath my feet like living tissue. I would wake gasping, my sheets soaked with sweat, my heart hammering so violently I feared it might rupture. One night, I decided to put the board away, hoping that removing it from sight might diminish its influence. I placed it in my bedroom closet, on the top shelf behind some winter blankets. As I closed the closet door, I felt a sudden, powerful grip on my shoulder, fingers digging into muscle with such force that I cried out in pain. Simultaneously, an Arctic breath ghosted across the back of my neck, carrying with it a whispered word in a language I didn't recognize but somehow understood. Stay. I fled the apartment that night, driving aimlessly until dawn, too terrified to return home. When I finally did, exhaustion overcoming fear, I discovered bruises on my upper arms, dark purple marks in the distinct pattern of fingerprints too large to belong to any human hand. In desperation, I called Mark, only to learn from his roommate that he had checked himself into a psychiatric facility 3 days earlier, after an incident involving self-harm. According to his roommate, Mark had been found in the bathroom, carving symbols into his forearm with a razor blade, the same symbols that adorned the board. That was when I decided to return the board to the attic where we'd found it. I drove to Mark's house with the thing wrapped in a black trash bag, unable to bear looking at it directly. His roommate let me in reluctantly, eyeing the package in my arms with suspicion. The attic seemed different, larger, with corners that receded into shadows too dense for my flashlight to penetrate. The air was stagnant and smelled of decay, like the inside of a long-sealed tomb. I worked quickly, placing the board back beneath the loose floorboard, my hands trembling so violently I struggled to position the plank correctly. As I turned to leave, my flashlight flickered and died. In the sudden darkness, I heard movement, a slow, deliberate shuffling from the far corner of the attic. My breath caught in my throat as I fumbled for my phone, desperate for any source of light. The shuffling drew closer. Something cold and damp brushed against my cheek. I ran, stumbling down the attic stairs, through the house, and out into the blessed normality of daylight. That was 2 weeks ago. I'd like to say that returning the board ended the phenomena, that life has returned to normal. It hasn't. The occurrences have diminished in frequency and intensity, but they continue. I still wake with bruises I can't explain. Mirrors still show glimpses of something standing just behind me when I know I'm alone. My dreams remain plagued by corridors and pursuits. Most troubling is what happened yesterday. I received a text message from Mark's phone. Impossible, since his roommate told me Mark remains institutionalized without access to his cell. The message contained no words, only an image. A photograph of my bedroom taken from the doorway, showing my empty bed with the covers pulled back invitingly. The timestamp on the photo read 3:33 a.m., a time when I was asleep in that very room, or thought I was. I've begun to question my grip on reality. Is it possible that what Mark and I unleashed wasn't some external entity, but rather something that was always inside us, some dark corner of consciousness that the board simply allowed us to access? Or have I been the one doing these things, turning on faucets, opening doors, bruising my own arms, in some dissociative state I can't remember? I've installed cameras in my apartment, hoping to capture evidence of whatever haunts me. So far, they've revealed nothing unusual, except for one disturbing detail. At precisely 3:33 every morning, there's a 2-minute gap in the footage. Not static, not darkness, simply missing time, as if the recording jumps forward, erasing 120 seconds from the record. Tonight, I plan to stay awake through that critical time, to witness whatever happens in those missing minutes. I've positioned myself in the living room, with clear sight lines to all entrances. I have a voice recorder running and a notebook to document my observations. The rational part of my mind insists that I'll find nothing, that this has all been an elaborate psychological reaction to suggestion and stress. But another part of me, a part that grows stronger with each passing day, knows that when 3:33 arrives, I won't be alone in this apartment. And whatever joins me, whether external entity or fractured aspect of my own psyche, has been with me since that first night with the board, waiting patiently for me to acknowledge its presence. The shadows are growing longer now as evening approaches. I can hear something scratching inside the walls, subtle, rhythmic, like fingernails seeking an exit. The air feels charged, as it does before lightning strikes. My computer screen keeps flickering, though the power is stable. I know now that some doors, once opened, cannot be fully closed again. Some games once played never truly end. The board may be back in its hiding place, but whatever we invited into this world remains, whispering in the dark corners of consciousness, waiting for its next move in a game whose rules we never understood. And sometimes, in the moments between wakefulness and sleep, I can almost grasp the terrible truth that the board was never the conduit. We were. The sound comes first, wood splintering against metal, hinges groaning in protest, then the rush of cold air that feels like death's breath against my skin. My eyes snap open to the darkness, pupils dilating in a desperate search for shapes in the void. 3 a.m. Always 3 a.m. The digital clock on my nightstand burns this accusation into the darkness, its red glow the only constant in my increasingly fractured reality. I live at the end of Pinewood Lane, where the asphalt gives way to gravel and then to nothing but dense forest. My nearest neighbor is half a mile away, close enough that I can see the faint glow of their porch light through the trees on clear nights, but far enough that a scream would die in the space between us. I chose this isolation deliberately 3 years ago, craving solitude after my divorce. The bitter irony that I now desperately wish for human proximity isn't lost on me. It started 6 weeks ago, a single night when I was jolted awake by the sound of my front door slamming open against the wall. I'd assumed I'd forgotten to lock it, cursed my carelessness, and dragged myself from bed to secure it. The next night it happened again, and the next, and the one after that. Each time I became more vigilant, checking the locks repeatedly before bed, adding more security measures with each failure. First came the deadbolt, then the chain lock, then the reinforced hinges. When those failed, I added a metal security bar that wedged beneath the doorknob. Last week, I hammered wooden planks across the frame in desperation. This morning, I found them splintered on the floor, the door standing wide open to the night, inviting the darkness inside. The temperature in my house drops dramatically when it happens. The thermostat shows a 15-degree plunge within seconds. I can see my breath forming clouds in front of my face as I make the now familiar journey from bedroom to entryway. The first few times, I searched outside with a flashlight, its beam cutting pathetic arcs through the dense woods surrounding my property. I never found footprints, disturbed foliage, or any sign that someone had been there. After 2 weeks of this torment, my supervisor at work pulled me aside to ask about the dark circles under my eyes. I mumbled something about insomnia, unable to articulate the truth, that I was being haunted by something I couldn't see or understand. She suggested I take some personal time. I nodded in agreement, but the thought of spending more time alone in that house made my stomach clench with dread. The recording was a last-ditch effort to gather evidence, to prove to myself that I wasn't losing my mind. I set up my phone on the hallway table, hidden behind a stack of books, and let it record through the night. The next morning, after securing the door yet again, I retrieved the phone with trembling hands and listened. Hours of silence broken by the sudden crack of the door at exactly 3:05 a.m. Then something I hadn't expected. A sound like labored breathing, wet and heavy, moving slowly down my hallway. My name, whispered in a voice that seemed to bubble up from underwater, repeated with increasing urgency. Then laughter, low and guttural, building to a sound so inhuman that my brain refused to categorize it. I deleted the recording immediately, my thumb jabbing at the screen in panic, but the damage was done. The sounds had imprinted themselves on my mind. I consulted a locksmith who spent 3 hours examining the door and its frame. He found nothing unusual, no signs of forced entry. He suggested I install a security camera. I did, positioning it to capture both the exterior and interior of the entryway. The first night, it recorded normally until 2:59 a.m. when the feed became distorted with static. At exactly 3:00 a.m., it went completely black. The image returned at 3:07 a.m., showing the open door and nothing else. The second night, the camera was found smashed on the floor. Sleep deprivation has become my constant companion. I find myself nodding off at inappropriate times, at my desk, at stoplights, in the shower. The boundaries between wakefulness and dreaming have become blurred. Sometimes, I think I see movement at the corners of my vision, a dark shape ducking just out of sight. My reflection in mirrors and windows doesn't always move in synchronicity with my own actions, sometimes lagging behind by a fraction of a second, as if reluctant to follow. I've researched the history of my house, spending hours in the local library's archives. The structure was built in 1937 by a retired doctor who lived there alone, until his death in 1952. Since then, it has changed hands 16 times, with no owner staying longer than 4 years. There are no recorded deaths on the property, no violent crimes, nothing that would explain what's happening. The librarian noticed my interest and quietly informed me that the house has a reputation locally. People don't stay there long, she said, refusing to elaborate further when I pressed for details. Last night, I decided to confront whatever was entering my home. Instead of hiding in my bedroom, I positioned myself in the living room, facing the front door. I placed a baseball bat across my lap and waited, fighting to stay awake as the hours crawled by. At 2:55 a.m., the temperature began to drop. I could feel cold air seeping beneath the door, curling around my ankles like ghostly fingers. My breath became visible, small puffs of vapor that dissipated in the increasingly frigid air. At precisely 3 a.m., despite my vigilance, despite my determination to watch it happen, I experienced a momentary blackout. 1 second I was staring intently at the door, and the next it was already open, the wooden barricade I'd constructed lying in fragments on the floor. The cold intensified, burning my lungs with each inhale. Then came the sensation of being watched, not from the doorway as I had expected, but from behind me. I couldn't move. My muscles locked in place as paralyzing fear coursed through my system. The baseball bat slipped from my nerveless fingers and clattered to the floor. I heard breathing directly behind my right ear, felt a slight disturbance in the air as something moved closer. My name, whispered with terrible intimacy, caused a violent shudder to run through my body. I tried to respond, to challenge whatever presence had invaded my home, but my voice failed me. A pressure developed on my shoulder, as if someone, something, had placed a hand there. It was heavy, heavier than any human touch could be, and cold enough to penetrate through my sweatshirt and burn the skin beneath. I wanted to scream, but could only manage a strangled whimper. The pressure increased until I thought my collarbone would crack under the weight. The laughter started then, beginning as a low chuckle and building to that same inhuman sound I'd captured on the recording. It seemed to come from everywhere at once, behind me, from the open doorway, from inside my own head. My vision began to darken around the edges as hyperventilation made my head swim. Just before I lost consciousness, the pressure vanished, and I heard 5 words that continued to echo in my mind. Soon you'll be ready. Soon. I awoke on the living room floor at dawn, the door closed and locked as if nothing had happened. The wooden barricade was intact, showing no signs of the destruction I'd witnessed. The only evidence of my experience was a large, hand-shaped bruise on my shoulder, the skin mottled purple and black in a pattern that no human hand could make. 5 elongated digits with what appeared to be an extra joint in each finger. Today, I contacted a realtor about selling the house. She sounded enthusiastic until I gave her the address, at which point her tone changed completely. She claimed she was too busy to take on new clients and suggested I try another agency. I've called 6 realtors today with similar results. No one will help me leave this place. As I write this, the sun is setting. Night is coming again. I've packed a bag and plan to check into a motel, but my car won't start. The mechanic can't come until tomorrow afternoon. I'm trapped here for one more night, and I can feel something building in the atmosphere of the house. An anticipation, an eagerness. The air feels charged, like the moments before a severe thunderstorm. I've moved a dresser in front of the door, piled chairs against it, and wedged every available piece of furniture into the hallway. Deep down, I know these efforts are futile. Whatever visits me at 3 a.m. doesn't operate according to physical laws. It will come again tonight, and this time, I sense it won't merely observe. The sun has disappeared completely now. The house is silent, except for the occasional settling noise that all old structures make. Or at least, that's what I tell myself when I hear the faint creaking of floorboards from rooms I'm not occupying. There are still hours until 3 a.m., but already I can feel the temperature beginning to drop. Something tells me that tonight will be different. Tonight, I'll finally learn what the visitor wants, why it has chosen me, and what it means when it says I'll be ready. The thought should terrify me, but instead, I feel an odd calm spreading through my body. Perhaps this is acceptance. Perhaps it's surrender. Or perhaps, most disturbing of all, it's anticipation. Because part of me, a small buried part that I'm reluctant to acknowledge, has begun to wait for the sound of the door opening with something close to eagerness. I think, on some level I don't yet understand, I've started to look forward to 3 a.m.